Добрый день. No, you destroyed it. I was going to say как дела, and then you're going to say хорошо and everything. Anyway, that's it. That's all I know in Russian. 10 years working for JetBrains, and that's all I know in Russian. What's worse is that 20 years I've been married to a Russian woman, and that's all I know in Russian. Anyway, welcome to this talk on removing barriers. And what this talk is a little bit about is some inside story on how JetBrains works, how we operate as a company, and some of the stories of what's good and what's not so good. No, I'm not going to say bad, what's not so good. So to give you some background and story about JetBrains, how many of you are familiar with JetBrains? Okay, that was a joke. So JetBrains started by 3 people in the Czech Republic, Sergey, Valentin, and Eugene. And actually, 2 of them still remain. One of them is still at JetBrains, but as part of the incubator. And that was in the year 2000. They used to work for a company called TogetherSoft. Anybody heard of TogetherSoft? Yeah, it was bought by Borland. Anybody remember Borland? Borland was that company that was doing great, and then they renamed themselves to Emprise, and then it collapsed, and then they resuscitated, and then they died again, and then they resuscitated, and yeah, that's Borland. So it was started by 3 people, and then eventually we grew, and just now we've hit over 1,000 something people. This was recently actually our office in St. Petersburg, which has been upgraded to 2 towers. Which is really nice because I've never been there. I was there last week and I had set up all these meetings with people, but I did not know that some of them were on the East Tower and some of them were on the West Tower, and I kept making sure that every meeting is east-west, east-west, right? So I was doing a hell of a lot of exercise. And we've got offices in quite a few parts of the world. Some of us work remote. And I'll tell you a little bit about like how we work. And we're not really a traditional hierarchy. So despite having 1,000 people, we don't really have many layers of managerial people, right? We're generally still kind of like developers and then team leads, and then you would call it kind of like management, so to speak. So more or less it's about the 3 levels, 3, 4 levels at max. But when talking about the hierarchy, more importantly is that really everyone has a voice there independently of who they are. So it's not a question of like if I come up with an idea or if I object to some way that the company is running or some product is, in my opinion, not good, I'm not allowed to say anything. Anybody can say anything they want to anyone they want. Another matter is if anyone is listened to. But the point is that you're very open in these types of communications. So there is no this concept of, well, you know, I'm just the developer. I shouldn't have an opinion about something. You can go and talk to anyone you want and have any opinion. And how many of you here are developers? Right? How many of you are in marketing? Right? So all of the developers always have an opinion about marketing. And they can always share it at JetBrains. The way that we're organized is a little bit in kind of like smaller companies, so to speak. So each product has its own kind of QA, product marketing, development, even all the different things that you can think of in a team. And then we have a bunch of other people that are shared, such as, for example, the web team, the developer advocacy, which is where I work, and because some of us actually cover multiple products, and then we work closely with the team. But if you think about it, it really is in a way like smaller companies inside a larger company, so to speak. In terms of rules and regulations, not much. I mean, in essence, it's work whenever you want, work on what you want, and get stuff done. And that's brilliant, right? I mean, yeah, you come to work. What do you want to do? Whatever you want. Where can you do it? Wherever you want. When do you want to come? Whenever you want. It's like, if I tell you that, it's like paradise. Yeah? Like, how many of you would love to work in a company like that? Everyone would. Everyone would love to work in a company that people don't tell them what they have to do. They just do something. But the problem is that it's not quite as easy as that, right? Because some things work and some other things are a little bit harder to get done. But we're going to try and break down a little bit of these different aspects of it and see what works and what does not. So I said that you can work essentially whenever you want, right? So really at JetBrains, there isn't this concept of office hours as such, right? When I first started at JetBrains, I clearly remember people used to come in at around 11:30, 12 midday, which for me was mind-blowing. You know, back in my previous company, I had to be at work at 8 in the morning, and here people are coming in at 11:30, 12. And I'm like, this is crazy. Now, the majority of people, or many people, come in at around 9:30, 10. Do you know why? Because we serve a really good breakfast. Essentially, that's the only reason. In Germany, a lot of them go to work then is also because they got to take the kids to school and that. But, you know, in terms of the rules of engagement, is essentially like be there for the meetings. And if you're in Bavaria, you're not allowed to go to the office on a Sunday. Like legally, you're not allowed to go to the office on Sunday because, you know, Bavaria is in Germany and they really love to have rules in Germany. It's like, you know, we're going to have a party, but first we have to establish the rules. So in Germany, it's actually legally, like if someone goes to the office on Sunday, the office director can be criminally charged. That's how it is. Just like Spain or Russia. No. In Spain, we don't even go to the office on Mondays. So what are the benefits that this has? Your kid is sick, it's really not a problem. You need to do paperwork, it's really not a problem. You know, you can't come to work for whatever reason someday, it really isn't a problem. No one really is going to ask you, like, why didn't you come into work today, right? So really, it's all about, essentially, I would say, benefits. Does it work? Absolutely. Like, we've never had really any complaints of, like, because you will work from, you know, 12 until 4, that is causing me problems. In fact, a few years ago, we got a prize for as one of the companies that provides the best support. And you would think that support engineers have to be there very early on and whatever. Our support engineer starts work at like 7 o'clock at night and goes into the like 5 in the morning, something like that, right? It really isn't a problem. But there are the aspects of like being there for meetings, and let's talk a little bit about meetings. And I want to give you some important context here that different teams, as I said, JetBrains works differently, so different teams work in different ways. Some of the experiences that I share here obviously is speaking on behalf of my own team and how we work, but different teams work in different ways, so not everything applies to everything. So now, how many of you here love meetings? Come on, be honest. Okay, there's 3 or 4 people that were courageous enough to put up their hands. You've probably heard boring meetings and meetings should die and, you know, 9 reasons that meetings suck. By the way, I'm giving you really good ideas for a blog post. So when you go home, you can write a blog post that says meetings are destroying your productivity, and it will be the first on Hubber and on Hacker News, and you'll be really successful. If you figure out how to monetize blog posts, which I haven't yet, but never mind. But the point is that, yes, meetings do suck, but the essence of it is that bad meetings suck, which feels like common sense, but apparently it really isn't common sense as such. So some of the things that we try and find, for example, is the meeting purpose, to clearly define what is the purpose of that meeting. And by and large, say, if I can avoid having a meeting, I will avoid having a meeting. And if we try and break down meetings, essentially they're normally into 2 categories, right? More or less, they're coordination or status update. Coordination, single topic, right? What are we coordinating on? What is the objective? What is the thing that we're speaking about? And what I find that is really, really important and really valuable that has helped me is, what are the action items of this meeting, right? If I walk out of a meeting with no action items, that is basically 1 hour of waste of our life, or half an hour. What are the action items that I'm going to walk out with in this meeting? And sometimes it's very good to send those action items beforehand. Actually, it's always good to set those action items. Meaning that when you think about putting together a meeting for coordination, you have some action items to walk away with. Because otherwise, you're wasting your time and the time of others. Now, the other aspect of meeting is about stand-ups. Developers. How many of you do Agile? Right? And it's great, right? Yeah? Someone's like already, Agile is the new waterfall. Remember waterfall? Yeah. Now Agile sucks. There's something else that's going to come out next week. I don't know what it is, but it'll come out. And Agile is interesting because one of the concepts that Agile introduced was this concept of stand-ups, right? How many of you do stand-ups? Right. So actually inside JetBrains, there's quite a lot of teams that do stand-ups. And the funny thing is that, like, I'm personally against stand-ups because I think that you got to understand, like, what is the purpose of a stand-up? What exactly are you doing it for? Are you doing it because you know, what is the main goal of it? Is it about sharing updates, right? So what do you go and share updates? So usually when I used to go to a stand-up, it was like this. I would go to a stand-up and I would stand there because you're not allowed to sit down, right? There's even this theory that you should do push-ups during stand-ups so that you're more attentive. So you're standing up and you're phased out until it's your turn, right? I'm just kind of standing there. I wonder if I should buy that new subscription to Netflix this month. Oh, it's my turn, is it? Yes. Yes, I was working on this bug and I can't fix it. Okay, next. Right. You know, you really don't seem to care that much about what your colleagues are doing. So we fixed that. We said, you know what? We're going to alternate. We're going to do it randomly so that people would like take a ball and throw the ball at someone else, right? And say, now it's your turn. And that way you would keep everyone in the mood. I don't really believe in stand-ups. There's quite a few teams that do it at JetBrains. But I feel like stand-ups there's way more efficient ways to try and communicate the things that you're doing, and we use different tactics. But so then some people say, no, stand-ups is about trust, right? It's about commitment to your colleagues, right? It's about going there and saying, you know what, I am working on this bug. And then tomorrow you've made like this public commitment, and tomorrow I'm going to, today I'm going to work on this feature, I'm going to get it done by tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and you haven't done the feature, and they're like, well, they're lazy. They've been saying the same thing for a few weeks. Like, what is going on, right? And what's the best way to establish trust between people is to put them on the spot in a very tense situation. That's how you gain trust. And there, in case you didn't realize, I'm being sarcastic. So some people say that stand-ups is very, very good about communication, right? And as developers, we tend to not, and I'll say this in a very polite way, we're not the most communicative of species, right? We sometimes have trouble expressing ourselves. And what better way to encourage communication than have someone in a room 15 minutes and just talk to their next colleague for 1 minute about something that their colleague doesn't even care about, right? It's not. Like, if you're limiting your communication to 5 minutes a day, that's really not helping you in terms of communication. So we, for example, some of the teams are using alternatives to stand-ups. We use tracking tools. We used logging stand-ups. For example, my team, we log our stand-ups, so to speak. We've got integration between Slack to Confluence, and then we push it to Confluence, and then, generally most of us look at it once in a while and see what other people are working on. But we talk about communications, and that is probably one of the biggest issues that happens in companies as they grow. Because, I mean, when I joined JetBrains, we were about 140 people. Now we're over 1,000 people. And this is basically true, right? As the number of people grow in a company, the communication grows. And we're still generally flat. As I said, we do not have, like, overall, still, we do not have project coordinators that are coordinating between coordinators of different coordinators, and then there's those coordinators that coordinate with the other coordinators, and everyone is doing all of these different things. But that has actually posed a serious challenge to us, right? Because that is a big problem as your company grows. And there's many challenges of growth. First of all, it's like, who's who? I mean, I go to the office. The other day I was in the office, and I come to St. Petersburg like twice a year, more or less. And I was sitting in the cafeteria, counting the number of people that I know as they were walking up the stairs. And I think like around 30 people walked past, and I knew 2 people, right? So you no longer know who is who anymore, which is really a problem. I mean, it's a major mind shift when you go from like 50 people that you used to work with to 1,000 people. which is okay. You're like, big deal, I don't know who's who. It's okay. There is no problem. But the thing is that you're like, who does what? Right? And this is an issue that we actually have. And when I talk about the tools that we use, we've tried to actually solve this in an interesting way. You know, like, I want to do something. Who does that? Well, I don't know. Right? And then the other issue is, are there two people working on the same thing? And this happens time and time again. So, for instance, how many of you are familiar with a tool called ReSharper? Okay, we should do way more marketing in Russia. So we have a tool called ReSharper, which is a plugin for a tool called Visual Studio, which essentially makes things work better. As some people say, it makes Visual Studio decent. Then we have another thing called IntelliJ. Anybody heard of IntelliJ? No? No? Are you in the right? Yeah, no. So we have this other tool called IntelliJ. So one day, I'm talking to this, there's a colleague of mine that's working on this tool in IntelliJ, which is called an IntelliJ Trainer, which essentially is a plugin. It's not like Clippy. Remember Clippy from Microsoft? It's not that. But it's this tool essentially that says, here, let me show you how to be more efficient in IntelliJ with IntelliJ, right? It walks you through the process. And it's really, really cool. And then one day me that's remote, right? And like, one of the guys works here and the other one works here, which is basically a floor apart, and I work in Spain, and I'm visiting, and I go and talk to the other guy, and he's like, oh, let me show you something cool I'm working on. What are you working on? I'm working on this plugin that trains you on how to use our tools. I'm like, did you know that Sergey is working on the same thing? He's like, who? Right? That happens over and over again. People start to work on different things, and there is no coordination between these people. And especially remember when I said you kind of a little bit work on anything you want, because that's another thing as part of the JetBrains. Like, there are people that come to JetBrains as a developer, and everyone at JetBrains has a 20% project. Everyone. And that 20% project can be anything. There are people that have moved from development to marketing, from marketing to HR, from HR to development, anything. And people can start to do different things and not realize that they have to communicate these to other people, because sometimes having a joint effort is good. So you have to start to create these communication channels to try and make things a little bit easier to raise awareness. And how do you do this? The first question is, do you push or do you pull? Right? Because if you're pushing too much communication to people, what do people do? They phase out, they ignore it. Right? If you're constantly getting 600 emails, what do? You create a filter in your email app so that goes away. Right? So you're like, okay, well, how do I do this? Like, where is the balance? And it's a very, very difficult thing. Like, how much do we push versus how much do we pull? So what happens is that a lot of it ends up being a pull. And by pull, I mean that you put a whole bunch of documentation or guidelines or processes somewhere, hoping that someone will read it, right? Normally, that turns into what's called a black hole, otherwise known as Confluence. Okay? And we have our own black hole, and it is called Confluence, and we dedicate so much time to writing so much about process and stuff, and we're like, you know, when I first joined JetBrains, I'm like, there's no documentation about different things. Let me write all this. And then at times, 3 years later, I'm like, let me document all this, only to find that I documented it myself 3 years before, and I forgot about me documenting it, right? And this is the problem that happens time and time again. We put all of this document and process in place, and often people forget about it. So now it comes to like, what tools do we try and use to help this? Well, one of the things that we've tried to do, obviously, like with anyone, we've tried to keep email to a minimum. Because it sounds great to say you've kept email to a minimum. And email is actually not the best form of communication. A few years ago, a product came out which you might have heard of. It's called Slack. Anybody heard of Slack? I was being sarcastic. You don't have to raise your hands today. Okay, so Slack was great. Slack said, I'm going to eliminate email. Instead, I'm going to give you 635,000 notifications on a day. And I'll make sure that I'll give you that on the desktop. And just in case you're missing it, I will also send it to your mobile phone. And when you're calling me on Slack, I will ring the mobile phone as well. Even though you're talking to me, the mobile phone will still continue to ring. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Happens to me all the time. I was a big proponent of Slack. Like, I was one of the pioneers of bringing Slack into the company. I'm like, this is great. And there were people that were like really rejecting it. And I'm like, hey, did you hear about this? They're like, no, I said it was on Slack. Ah, okay. Slack is good. Slack has enabled a lot of stuff in our company. And when I talk about Slack, I can talk about any kind of chat program, right? But Slack has also introduced a lot of noise. And Slack has also introduced a lot of problems. And one of the things that I feel that it has introduced is this idea of everything is urgent, right? Like, someone pings me on DM, and they're like, I don't respond because, like, I look at it and I'm like, okay, that's going to take a little bit of time to think about. And I don't respond, and like an hour later, I get an email. They're like, hey, Hadi, I pinged you on Slack. Did you see it? Right? So now it goes like, yes, I did. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just going to wait a little bit to respond to you because I have to think about it. And that's what it's become, right? It's ended up in this, we have given ourselves this false sense of urgency of that we can go up to anyone, essentially virtually in Slack, ping them and say, attend to my needs right now. So Slack, I think, for example, for channels, for groups, for teams is great. Constantly pinging each other for non-urgent things is a distraction. Someone actually said to me, how do you solve the problem when you're working in an office and someone comes up to you and says, hey, do you have a moment I want to chat? And I said, well, for the past 20 years, I've been working remotely, so I solved that problem. There should be this law that if I have sound cancelling headphones on, don't come close to me. I joke. One of the things that we use also in trying moving away from email is a tracking tool. So we have a product called UTrack, but you can call yours anything you want. This has enabled us a whole bunch of things. This has enabled us the ability to itemize tasks. Instead of having thousands of emails coming through left and right, we create issues for anything, whether it's a bug, whether it's a business trip, whether it's a decision, whatever it is. And then we add people to the issue so they get notified. We remove them from the issue if they don't want to be notified. Anytime they can join the conversation and have a history of what's going on and leave the conversation, which is way more efficient than saying, oh, you know what? I'm going to include you in this email thread, but you missed 6,000 messages that came beforehand, right? And this is way more efficient. This has really helped us in a lot of things. And of course, there's workflows and stuff that automate a bunch of stuff, but it has helped us keep things in track. We also have this concept of an internal newsletter, which is like we send out some information once a month with different things about what's going on in the community, what the different product teams are doing, etc. But this still is very limited. Even the internal conference, which we have, which I'm sure many companies have, we try and talk about what is going on in the company. Initially, when we started this internal conference, we're like, well, JetBrains has a lot of technical people. Let's do a whole bunch of technical talks at an internal conference. And we try, and the feedback we got was we actually don't want so many technical talks. We want to know more about other things. We want to know more about what the company is doing. We want to know more about non-technical stuff. And now the balance has shifted to like 70% non-technical and 30% technical, and that's led to what we have like Technical Wednesdays, where colleagues can come and share information. And this worked great. People would come and give technical talks. Right? And we thought we've solved the problem because we've got this internal conference, which we share company information, and then we've got this Technical Wednesdays, which we share technical information. And then I would find that a lot of people were doing different things in the company that wasn't necessarily technical, and whether it was marketing, whether it was sales activities, whether it was whatever, and they would not share this really great information or what they've discovered or what they're working on. And I would say, why don't you share it? And they're like, where do I share it? I said, on Technical Wednesdays. They're like, it's not technical. I'm like, it's okay. It's called Technical Wednesdays, but it doesn't mean it's technical. And they're like, really? You call it Technical Wednesdays, but it's not technical? I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. So we actually renamed it. We now just call it Wednesday. No, I'm joking. We actually, I kid you not, we renamed it. The first idea was, let's rename it from Wednesday to Tech Talks, which was like, no, that's not solving the problem. Now we don't even know what day it is. And we renamed it to Jet Talks, I believe. But it still doesn't solve some of the issues, like who does what. And this is often a problem. One approach that we recently taken that has been really, really useful is, how many of you here use Slack? Right? Or any kind of similar scenario. So we've created a channel on Slack, which is called Who. And if you don't know how to do something, or who to contact, or who does what, you ask on Who. And anyone can respond to you. And it's become really, really useful because it helps people, as they come and join the company, know who to contact for what. And that also can be used and say, hey, I want to create a new project that's awesome. Actually, that gives me another idea. We should create a channel that's called Awesome Project. And then share this idea, and maybe some other people have that similar problem or have that similar idea, and you can join forces. Right? So it's a little bit about proactively announcing what you want to do in order to raise awareness and collaborate. And then let's talk about management, because I talked about how JetBrains isn't really very hierarchical. I'm sure you're all familiar with this tweet, which you have like the chief idea killer and the VP of No and all of these other thingies that go on. So we generally don't have that, right? We don't have any kind of micromanagement. We don't have any micro-reporting. We don't have any permissions. You can essentially work on anything you want. You can, we kind of try and set objectives, set a series of goals, provide guidance, sometimes better, sometimes worse. Remove obstacles. That's essentially what the idea is. And sometimes people artificially still have these obstacles in their mind. Really, there's this psychological barrier that they can't do something because they're not in a specific role. And that is still a problem that we don't know how to solve. Right? We say, you've got the freedom to do whatever you want, even if it's outside of the realm of the work that you're doing. But people still have this psychological barrier. But we say, no, you've got a lot of freedom to do whatever you want. But the problem is that freedom comes at a cost. You need people that are self-organized. You need people that have discipline. Right? And these are great words, but they're not simple to implement. You need people that have responsibility. And this, I need someone that knows how to organize their own tasks, work on their own tasks, be disciplined to stay on those tasks, not deviate, and be responsible for their actions. This doesn't work for everyone. Some people would like to actually be micromanaged. And I'll give you a case study of working on fun stuff, right? Right now, let's say, for example, I said, oh, you can just work on awesome stuff, okay? So I'm a developer, and I'm going to say, oh, I'm going to work on a whole bunch of awesome stuff. Okay, what am I going to work on? I'm going to work on this really, really cool feature that I have. Right? And you're like, right now, okay, does it add value? Yes. Do I enjoy it? Yes. It's brilliant. I'll just work on this feature because I enjoy it. At the end of the day, it's going to add value to my users because they're going to use my product and they're going to love my feature. So why not do it? But the questions that we don't often ask ourselves is what happens in the larger context. Like, does it add value? Is it more important for me to work on this feature now, or maybe some long-standing bug or something else that I could work on, right? Like, I have, for instance, a bug that's 2 years old, right? Which we have. I'm not going to deny it. Many of you have probably seen bugs that are 2 years old in our issue tracker. And it's like, so should I work on this feature now? Or should I go and fix that bug that's 2 years old, right? And what is the saying in Russian? How do they say it? What is it? Abenishovo 3 года ждут, or something like that. If you've waited 2 years, you can wait 3 years. Yeah. Let them wait 3 years for that bug. I'll just work on this feature. Sometimes that 3 years becomes 14 years, but let's not get into that. But I don't think about what happens if I am delaying working on this bug. How does it affect other things? And this sometimes is because we lose the bigger picture. So, you need to know how to prioritize your work. You need to put it have the ability to say no to some things. Not only to other people, but to yourself. Say, no, I'm not going to work on this feature right now. I need to work on this bug because it's more important. You know how to control your passions. We always talk about how passions are great. Just hire passionate people and let them free. No, passion can kill anything. Too much passion is a hazard. And you always need to question if what you're doing adds value. Right? This is a very important thing that we always forget about ourselves, right? Because is the work I'm doing adds value or not? And generally, at JetBrains, one of the issues that we have is that we're not driven by KPIs, yeah? We don't have numbers to meet. It's not a question of you say to the salesperson that, you hit $70 million, I'm randomly making up numbers, $70 million this year, you've reached your target. That doesn't exist. You don't say to a developer, you have to close $500, more like it. $500, you've reached your target. That doesn't exist. So then if that measurement doesn't exist, and one of the reasons is because KPIs can be gamed, right? You can play the system to reach your KPIs, then how do you know if what you're doing actually adds value or not? And that's where feedback is very important. That is where you really rely on not only your own intuition, but getting feedback from others. And we are good at sometimes giving constructive feedback, which means this is shit. We're not always good at saying, this is a really good job that you've done, blah, blah, blah. And freedom only works when there's trust. You need to trust people and say, look, I'm giving you the freedom, but I'm trusting that you go and do this, right? But if there's no management, what about leadership? Well, I personally hate the word leadership, right? Because first of all, what is leadership? Well, one thing is about not being a bottleneck. Not everything going through you. It's about learning to delegate to others. And this is very easy to say, very hard to do. Because it's like, why should I delegate and do something, someone else do something if I can do a way better job than them? It's about providing guidance and challenges, right? Sometimes it's very difficult for people it's very easy for people to get comfortable if they're not challenged. And sometimes we forget that we need to challenge people. We need to say to them, you're doing a good job, but push yourself a little bit. Because people become complacent, and not because they want to, but because sometimes they don't have that external motivation or that guidance or that challenge that is needed. And what's really important is about seeing the bigger picture. Because a lot of us are focused on what we're doing. But we need to have someone that sees this bigger picture and roots us in the right direction. It's about knowing how to listen and be heard. And there is a difference between listening to people and hearing people. And one of the mistakes that I always used to do, and everybody does this, right, is that when you're, for example, having a debate with someone, whether it's your colleague, whether it's your partner, whatever, how many times have you, let's say it's like a discussion that you feel strongly about, how many times are you listening to the other person and in your head you're only saying, oh, just shut up because I'm going to respond to you. You're not listening to them. You're just hearing them, waiting for them to shut up so that you can say what you have to say. And it's very hard at times to control that. What's also important is about being candid and saying to people, you know what? You're actually not doing a good job here. That is also difficult. Not a lot of managers can confront that situation. They can't say, you're not doing a good job. Sometimes it's just easier to just let people do whatever they're doing and get on with it. But most of all, I would say that it's about trusting and caring, right? It's about trusting and caring. But the problem is that trust and care is a two-way street. If you're trusting and caring for people and they don't trust and care back, it doesn't work. And there are many situations and there are times, for example, in my team, that I have given trust and care for someone, I have not received it, they're not on my team anymore. But that's the reality. This has to be a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street. And then you say, like, how do you keep this culture? Well, culture is kind of infused, right? And you lead by example. But you also need to understand different cultures and different people. And there's a lot of people at JetBrains that are working, that are Russian speaking, that come from Russia or other countries with similar cultures. But the problem is that this, there's also English people, there's other types of people, and different things mean different things in different languages. And sometimes these barriers cause problems. So, I don't know how many of you work with British people. I do. But the British are very unique in how they say things, right? When a British person says, I hear what you're saying, what they really mean is that I disagree and do not want to discuss it any further. What you understand is he or she accepts my point of view. Like, it's one of the cultures that literally what they say is never literally what they mean. Okay? One time I was having a discussion with one of my colleagues, Sasha. He's Russian, and we were 1 hour having a discussion, and I said to him, afterwards, I'm like, well, okay, thanks, Sasha. And he says to me, Hadi, well, that was a very interesting discussion. Now, I've grown up in England, and for that meant, Hadi, you've wasted my time. What the hell have you done? And I'm like, why? Like, what didn't you find fruitful? And he's like, what do you mean? No, he actually meant it was a very interesting discussion. And that's something you need to take into account. Also, this idea of never attribute to malice that what is, you know this quote, right? Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. There's an equivalent of this is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by ignorance. The fact that people might not know about something, that may not be aware of something, doesn't imply malice. And yet sometimes we immediately associate this idea. Some other things that we try not to do at JetBrains is don't moan up the corporate ladder. To begin with, because there is no corporate ladder. You take one step and you fall down, right? So essentially, you don't generally go to your manager and say, oh, I've got this problem with this person, help me fix it. No, it's you try and fix it directly. Emphasize on giving feedback, but give it and receive it. And when you receive it, do not be immediately critical. Often we say, give me feedback. And you're like, well, Hadi, I think that you are, a control freak. I'm not a bloody control freak. Who the hell said I'm a control freak? Actually, true story, yeah? If you immediately act defensive when someone gives you feedback, what you're doing is that next time they won't give you feedback, right? So it's very, very important. And oftentimes, like for example, I say to my manager, I'm like, hey, why don't you ever give me feedback? And his response should be, well, why don't you ever give me feedback? Because again, feedback is a two-way street. Right? And we often forget. We never give feedback to our team leads or to our colleagues. We're just really big in asking for feedback. So it's really about being the change and not sitting back and expecting other people to fix things for you. It's about trying to change things for the better and not focusing on bad-mouthing or criticizing or things like that. And it's important to protect the culture. But you have to be open to change, right? Because if you always do the same thing always, all the time, and the new person joins you, you're like, this is the way we do it, and this is how it's always been done, and this is how we're going to do it, and if you don't like it, piss off, you will never change and improve as a company either. So it's very important to keep that balance. And sometimes we seem to forget that as well. But most of all, I would say that it's about trusting in people and caring for people. And because when you do these things, when you end up in a situation where you actually trust a person and you establish a strong relationship with those people that you most work closely with, and you care for that person, and caring doesn't mean, hey, I really care about you. It's actually caring about their life. It's caring about their problems. It's being considerate. It's being empathetic. Then these people give the best they have to you, if that two-way street works. If it doesn't, then you need to find other people. So trusting and caring is the most important aspect in what I would say generally defines how JetBrains works. Thank you.